Foreign interference has been an evolving threat for some years now.
It's been about power for the Chinese party state.
China's rise was inevitable.
They wanted to be able to covertly influence our public debate.
This was a get down on your knees and kiss my boots job.
Is this the worst it's been?
It is difficult at the moment.
What do you mean by that?
They're schoolyard bullies.
They could hurt us very badly.
He crushed the Hong Kong democracy.
The dynamic has changed.
Their survival is the only thing that really matters to them.
Your family are inside the camps. Do you think they're all alive?
It's a genocide.
Australia is in the midst of a diplomatic freeze with China. According to Beijing, the laundry list of grievances and accusations is a long one. We've gone from cooperation to competition. And as the rise of China marches on, so do the threats facing Australia, the Asia-Pacific, and the rest of the world.
Madam Speaker, the President of the People's Republic of China.
When President Xi visited Canberra, deals were done and friendships were made.
It was actually what I would consider the golden period of the Australia-China relationship. We were signing the free trade agreement, we were escalating our relationship to a comprehensive strategic partnership. Really, it felt very golden at the time.
It is said that when friends meet, 1,000 cups of wine cannot contain their happiness. This is a happy night, and it's part of a historic day. After 10 long years of negotiation, we have finalised our free trade agreement as a sign of the comprehensive strategic partnership between our two countries.
This historic visit led to a new level of diplomacy between Australia and China.
But there was something else going on.
There was something else going on. You could see it to some extent already.
It didn't take long for the trust to dry up and the relationship to unravel.
As far as President Xi is concerned, the era of hiding your strength and biding your time is over.
It's the 100th year of the Communist Party. Never before have so many people risen so far, so fast.
China is quite simply determined to quickly resume what it sees as its rightful position as the world's #1 nation.
Supreme Leader Xi Jinping is on a mission to make China the world's greatest superpower.
Challenge for us in the West is to accept that the rise of China is legitimate. We can't stop it anyway. It is going to be the world's biggest economy. The rise of China is good for China and good for the world. China's rise was inevitable, just inevitable.
But it comes at a cost.
Just look at the actions, look at the words. It's pretty obvious that he thinks that China's time has come. And for the rest of us, it's a case of tremble and obey.
In 2012, the Communist Party of China installed an old-school communist as new leader, the ambitious Xi Jinping.
Do you think he revels in being feared?
Is it better to be loved or feared as a leader? And Xi Jinping has definitely gone for the feared option, and he's utterly ruthless in that.
The world's second-largest economy was powering. It had increased, on average, 10% a year for 30 years. With 800 million workers, China quickly became home to the largest companies in the world and the most billionaires. For the Chinese people, life had never been so good.
I think we have to look at China's rise and Australia's participation in that rise in a very positive way. Hundreds of millions of people have been lifted out of poverty, many of them in China herself.
But for the new Supreme Leader, China was on the wrong path. The ruling Communist Party had to be hardened up, and the Chinese people had to be reminded the CCP was in power.
Our coal, our gas, our iron ore has helped to bring about 500 million Chinese from the third world to the middle class in scarcely a generation, which has been a massive advance in human well-being, and let's be glad of that. But for China, I don't think this has ever really been about prosperity for the Chinese people. It's been about power for the Chinese party state.
In my judgment, he's the most malign, most aggressive, and most ambitious leader since Mao Zedong. He's seeking domination not just inside his country, but he's seeking domination outside of his country.
One of the first things Xi did as president was to highlight to the Chinese people the danger posed by the West and its Western values. Things like democracy, individual rights, and an independent media. He also highlighted the danger in questioning their own Chinese style of socialism. While outside China, the focus shifted to expansion, control, and interference. And nowhere have these drastic changes been felt more acutely than here in Australia. Which prompts the question, are we in a modern Cold War?
In some respects we are. I think we certainly are in cyberspace and in cybersecurity. Australia has never had a higher threat of hostile intelligence activity inside the country than we're currently facing.
Look, China is not the only actor in the cyberspace.
Senator James Paterson is chair of the Joint Parliamentary Committee on Intelligence and Security. Along with fellow MP Andrew Hastie, he's been banned from visiting China for being critical of Communist Party politics.
It is well known that the Chinese Communist Party is a pioneer, a very successful one, a very influential one in cyber attacks, and that there have been some attacks in Australia which have been attributed to China.
Sensitive information has been stolen. IT systems have been crippled. Even the headquarters of our democracy has been compromised.
When you look at the attack on the Parliament House email system, that shows the interest that foreign states have in our democracy and how it operates.
So how is that information useful to them?
Well, what a lot of foreign states and other foreign actors are looking to get insight into is how we make our decisions and why we make our decisions, and insight into the personalities in our political system. Now, to be fair, every nation state is involved in information gathering, but there is something unusual and unprecedented by the extent and the breadth of the way in which the Chinese Communist Party does it.
Australia's security and intelligence agencies had become aware of China's interference. Their findings raised a red flag, and the government responded. It was time for a dramatic diplomatic U-turn on China, but it would take place behind closed doors.
Good morning. Well, we've had very, very constructive discussions, the Premier and I and our ministers.
On the surface, business was good and only getting better. Diplomacy had seemingly reached new heights.
With the China-Australia Free Trade Agreement, we've further increased those economic opportunities.
If you look back to visits that we've had over a number of years, I've been in Parliament for 20 years, so back over the Howard years, very cordial relations, a two-way relationship that was mutually beneficial. And we still have that. We still have a very important trading relationship with China, and we want that to continue. We want peace to continue in our region, no question about that. But the dynamic has changed quite dramatically in recent years, and certainly within the last couple of years.
It's time to eating beef?
Yes. Very good. More beef. Thank you all very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
But behind the scenes, the pushback on China was on. Chinese Communist Party interests in Australia were now being monitored and scrutinised like never before.
Clearly, we receive intelligence and we've formed judgments over a period of time, which has been backed up by the evidence. Certainly, I think people would be quite staggered by the amount of intelligence and the very clear direction that China is now taking.
Chinese Communist Party interference was found to be intent on destabilisation and corruption of Australia's political system.
Former heads of ASIO have publicly said that levels of foreign interference and espionage in Australia are at the highest levels they have ever been, and that overwhelmingly the culprit of that is the Chinese Communist Party.
Today, I spoke to my leader, Bill Shorten, and offered my resignation from the front bench, which he accepted.
One Chinese operation targeted members of the Australian Labor Party.
2015 was the year when Sam Dastyari was exposed as having taken money from a wealthy Chinese businessman in an attempt to shift Labor policy on the South China Sea.
It was a shocking revelation.
The last thing you should do is tip that foreign national off. Whose side is he on?
Sam Dastyari has to go. Well, I've got a list of his front benchers that are in the same category.
But the operation was foiled and ended in embarrassment for China and the Australians involved.
And it became clear from that point that, in fact, a lot of Chinese money had made its way into our major political parties' coffers. I'm talking about millions of dollars that went to Australian politicians. I think people started to ask the question, you know, are we allowing ourselves to be subverted here?
At what point did things start to turn towards the negative?
It's clear that there are a number of points, and perhaps it had been building up to this, but the government's decision in relation to 5G to exclude high-risk vendors, which included Huawei and ZTE, that aggravated the Communist Party, and it was a decision taken by our country, which was absolutely the right decision to take.
Many accusations are made about Huawei, but none of these are proven. We have a Communist Party cell that runs Huawei. Yes, there is a Communist Party branch in Huawei, as there is one in Walmart, Nokia, Samsung, and I assume BHP and Rio Tinto.
The world's largest manufacturer of telecommunications equipment is a privately owned Chinese company with links to the Communist Party, and its network covers the globe.
The 5G network is really going to be the backbone of a modern economy and a modern society. This is the world of, digital medicine, digital health, the Internet of Things. Now, if we're not satisfied of the integrity of that network or its imperviousness to outside actors, then there's any number of opportunities that a hostile actor, it doesn't need to be state, could exploit to basically bring Australia to its knees.
Now let me turn to the issue at hand. How can Huawei be trusted to deliver 5G in Australia? At Huawei, we are proud of our transparency, our track record of demonstrating and making available to customers and governments everything we do.
Under Chinese cybersecurity law, any company or individual must provide the state with intelligence and information as requested.
Malcolm Turnbull let it be known that his first action was to ring Donald Trump and report it to him as if he were a poodle turning over to have his tummy tickled.
The Huawei decision was quite justified. It was based on intelligence advice. It wasn't an anti-Chinese decision. Definitely not.
Australia set a precedent in its ban on China's 5G technology. Countries all over the world soon followed.
How do you think we'd go getting Telstra to run China's internal communications? Do you think for a second that the Chinese would be happy with that? Of course not. And I think a good rule of thumb, particularly when dealing with authoritarian governments, dictatorships, is to say if we couldn't do it in their country, they certainly shouldn't be able to do it in our country.
Intelligence experts had major concerns that China and the CCP were pulling too many strings on Australian soil. The time had come to call out China. It was a very bold move for a middle power and the boldest diplomatic move by Australia in decades.
I can't imagine a country like China who thinks they understood Australia, not realizing that when you push an Australian man or woman, you're going to get a push back. If you want cooperation, that's quite possible, but if you push, you get pushed back, and I don't think China understood that.
But then the strategic approach and attitude to China was reassessed. The threat level was dialed up. It was now time to go out in front.
I think people realised that with Xi Jinping coming into power and the arrival of his wolf warrior diplomacy, that all of a sudden there was nowhere to hide. There are things that we simply had to do to protect our own sovereignty.
The Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I present the National Security Legislation Amendment, Espionage and Foreign Interference Bill 2017 and the explanatory memorandum.
New laws were created, specifically aimed at foreign powers who interfere with Australia.
Today I'm introducing legislation to counter the threat of foreign states exerting improper influence over our system of government and our political landscape.
The Espionage and Foreign Interference Bill and the Foreign Interference Transparency Scheme Bill have given Australian security agencies new powers.
We said, if you are a foreign government and you are seeking to influence our political debate, you can do so, but you have to do so transparently. You have to be open about it. You can't do it covertly. Now, no government in the world that we have diplomatic relations with objected to that, other than the Chinese government. And I think that shows something about what their intent is and was.
With nothing further to lose in the diplomatic relationship, it then became a public confrontation.
I really do think that there was always going to be this clash. China's expanding interests and its aggressiveness in pursuing those interests were always going to run into more walls. But what happened, I think, is that Australia was no longer willing to play ball for the longest time, to preserve that incredibly important trade relationship.
Now, you can't ignore difficulties, tensions and fragilities in a relationship with our major export destination.
Is that to say that the positions that Australia has since taken after you left office weren't the right ones?
No, the big change since I was in office and I was voted out in 2007 is the change in the attitude of the Chinese leadership. I think that has changed. It has become more aggressive. I don't criticise the Australian government for that.
Is this the worst it's been?
It's more difficult now than it's been for 30 years.
What do you mean by that? Is this as tense as relationships have been between Australia and China?
I think it's difficult. There was obviously some tensions at the time of Tiananmen Square. All I can say is that it is difficult at the moment. It's a very big foreign policy challenge for the current Australian government. The major reason why the relationship has soured is the more belligerent attitude the Chinese government has taken. But we have to persevere. We have to play a long game.
Do you think China cares about what we say or what we do?
I can assure you that every country in the world is concerned about what others say of it. But it's also why you use diplomacy. And we don't use diplomacy. Australia's a bunch, in diplomatic terms, we're bogans, ripping around in a Monero, giving a rude signal outside the window, as a writer said recently. And we haven't demonstrated any creative middle power diplomacy in handling this challenge of a China returning to the status it once had in the world.
How much of your business went to China?
95% of it went to China. Now we're not sure where it's going to go.
Are you selling anything at all to China? It's all gone.
What they're up to at the moment might only just be the tip of the iceberg.
In April 2020, Scott Morrison lobbied world leaders for an independent inquiry into the origins of COVID-19. It seemed like a reasonable and logical next step in understanding the worsening pandemic. But it was perceived by Chinese diplomats to be an outrageous insult and would become a trigger point in a declining diplomatic relationship. And by November, Beijing hit back, and in true wolf warrior style.
When China announced that plan to slap those extra tariffs on Australian wine, what was your initial reaction to that?
The language I used, I won't use on air.
You're welcome to, if you like.
No.
Just for the honest answer.
No, this was rubbish. This was a get down on your knees and kiss my boots job.
But was it for you, or was that kiss my feet to the government?
To the government, yeah.
And you got caught up in it?
We got caught up. We were just one of the ones they picked at random because we were the #1 imported wine supplier. So if you wanted to hit Australia, wine was a good place to hit us. That was it, you know, that's their decision. We can do nothing about that.
G'day, Dick. How are you, mate? Just passing you on your left now, mate. Okay, well, I'll just maintain this position.
Flying high above some of the best farming country in Australia is Dick Estens and his mate, Andrew Crow.
How's the orange harvest going? It'll work out, mate. Keep your fingers crossed.
They're keeping an eye on their crops, millions of dollars sitting in the ground. It's been a tough few years with drought, flooding rains, and a monumental mouse plague.
You've had a bad run, really, when you think about it.
Yeah, some might say that, but this is farming, you know, like this is what
how it is.
It's how it is. It has its few downsides, but by jingoes, it's got a lot of good upsides.
We take a lot of punishment out here with nature, droughts and global warming and rivers not flowing. So at this stage, you know, we've survived all that. I think we'll outlive the Communist Party pretty easily. I think they've got headaches.
The trading relationship with China has been mutually beneficial for decades, but there have been worrying signs. China has a history of economic coercion that goes back years. It's how it responds to political disagreements.
So this is not specific to China. We've seen the United States use tariffs and sanctions to do the same thing. But China has been particularly willing to wield its economic might to try to achieve political goals. We've seen this happen when Norway was targeted for giving Liu Xiaobo the Peace Prize and salmon exports were cut off. We've seen it happen when the United States deployed THAAD in South Korea and China retaliated against a whole range of South Korean industries. It's also happened with Japan. And of course, now here in Australia, we can see that 14 different industries have been targeted by China as a result for Australia not kowtowing.
When it was announced, I thought this is just China trying to get Australia to do what they tell us to do.
Tyrels has been one of the most iconic names in Australian wine for over 150 years.
Where are we, Bruce? What do we got here? What am I seeing?
Well, this bit's the original bit of the winery. These two bars here were built for the first vintage in 1864.
1864.
Still going strong.
Still going, yeah.
Despite all the problems along the way.
Yeah, we've survived a few, and it looks like we're the only original family company that'll be left.
Tyrels started exporting to China in the early days. It quickly grew into big business.
This fantastic opportunity opened up. Opened the door to the Golden Palace, and we all went, you beauty.
The profits were huge, but when tariffs on wine hit 212%, Tyrels and many other Australian exporters were wiped out.
Are you selling anything at all to China? It's all gone. Zero. So does this prove that we were over-reliant on China?
Yeah, look, it could be upward of 700 wine businesses that are 80-odd% or more China.
And China didn't stop at wine. They turned their focus to numerous other export industries.
To say that I'm disappointed is an understatement.
The Agriculture Minister, after China belts Australian barley with a 5-year 80% tariff. Almost half the industry's entire export business is likely now dead.
Let's start off by talking about yourself. Tell me about your business and what you're able to grow out here.
Well, Peter, we're a farming business, and we're in the business of growing barley predominantly. The main trade is the beer and malting trade, but pretty much we're in the business of growing crops that conserve energy that can actually go places.
How important is the Chinese market for Australian barley growers?
The Chinese market has been extraordinarily lucrative, and it has been a fantastic centrepiece for large volumes of export barley to go up into Chinese malt houses. It would be sorely missed.
Andrew and Jodie Crow have spent over 30 years expanding their barley business and their family. They have 6 kids.
Mia, Maggie, Jerry, Nellie, Stanley and Flo. The kids had school holidays, and now with the Sydney lockdown, all the children are home with us.
There, Joe. Go ahead. When are we taking off?
Right on, let's go.
I think we were very popular in China because when they got the containers or the consignments and they opened them up and they thought, oh, this is fantastic, look at this product, it's exactly how we wanted it.
Beijing's enforced tariffs came as a surprise, but remarkably, the price hike made little difference.
4 tonne, righto.
Now that they've slapped the tariffs on all of our barley that's coming into China, what sort of an effect has that had on the industry here?
Well, it's had a massive impact, but what's happened is almost a happy accident. The cupboard in Australia was completely empty. When they put those tariffs on, there was really no barley in the country.
Really? So the silos were empty?
Yes.
I was under the impression that it was doom and gloom. We had all this stock that was available, ready to go to China, but wasn't the case.
No, well, it wasn't the case, but it could well be the case going forward, but it's given us enough lead time to actually go off and entertain other customers.
Looking ahead, the cost imposed by the tariffs on barley is estimated to be huge, more than $2.5 billion over the next few years. It's a big worry that's created an uncertain future.
Well, I'm concerned primarily for the fact that they have only really just started on this project. What they're up to at the moment might only just be the tip of the iceberg. If they wanted to really amp up the volume, they could and hurt us very badly.
I just think this world is a very strange place at the moment, and everyone's on edge. I do believe that we have to try and mend the relationship with them. It's a very important thing.
I'm Dick Astons, a cotton farmer from Moree. Been here for 40 years, growing cotton and barley, and in the last 10 years started growing oranges for the juicing industry.
How much of your business went to China?
All our cotton went to China, or 95% of it went to China. Now we're not sure where it's going to go.
At the moment, though, there's been nothing official in terms of extra tariffs like there has been on beef or barley or
They are
some of
straight
the...
plain not taking our cotton.
Just not taking it?
Not taking it.
Pretty incredible, isn't it?
They're schoolyard bullies.
Up until November 2020, China was our biggest customer, taking over half of all exported cotton. But now, due to the trade restrictions, exports to China are down to just 3%.
So, Dick, do you think that is an official government order, or do you believe that usual customers or buyers of our cotton are just too afraid to purchase it from us?
It's an official government order. You know, companies that we deal with have long-term relationships with these guys, and that's not the issue at all.
You must be worried about that.
Well, the market's really worried. The big sellers are really worried about it. It's costing us money now because we're not sure where next year's cotton crop's going.
The tariff and trade restrictions imposed by Beijing targeted 14 industries and wiped out billions of dollars in Australian exports. But the tariffs didn't go anywhere near our products that China so desperately needs.
The reason countries trade is not because they want to do favours to one another, not because they're mates, it's because it's in their mutual interest to do so. So why does China buy so much iron ore from us? Because we're a high quality, low cost, reliable supplier.
It is 2 o'clock in the morning. A 40,000-ton freighter arrives. It carries rust-coloured soil from Australia, the material from which iron and steel are made, iron ore.
As the world's largest steel producer, China has an insatiable appetite for iron ore. From the high-speed rail network to buildings, bridges, and the auto industry, it is the one thing China cannot do without.
How long can we rely on its purchase of our iron ore?
There is still very strong demand for our iron ore. We've got the best iron ore in the world. It's helping China produce the best steel that they can possibly produce. So that demand will be there for however long the Chinese government and Chinese companies want it. All the forecasts that we're seeing is that that will be for quite some time yet.
You have in the past called for a 1% levy to be placed on our iron ore. Do you still hold that view?
Yeah, look, I think one thing we must do is make sure any of the retaliatory actions that China takes against our country do not impose costs on small parts of our economy that would in any way weaken our unity as a nation. What China is clearly trying to do is divide us as a country. They're trying to pick off these issues and divide us as a nation. We've got to stick together. And one way of doing that would be saying, look, anytime that China imposes the costs on our jobs, on our industries through illegal trade actions, well, China's going to pay the bill. China will pay the bill. We'll send the bill to China for those actions, and we could do that with a levy on iron ore exports because they need our iron ore. They've got no other alternative, and so they'd have to pay the tax.
Would you ever turn off the iron ore tap?
From Australia's perspective, we want the trading relationship to continue and, frankly, Pete, to strengthen, not to diminish. And I think that's important for us. And I think people talking about different commodities, turning some on, some off, or a tit for tat, is just not productive in the relationship where it is at the moment.
As debate over the trade of iron ore divides opinions in Canberra, the attitude in the bush is much clearer.
Why are they taking us on?
I think they don't like the fact that we're a major supplier of iron ore to them. That gets up their nose. They're using excuses. You know, we're one of the first countries to call out on Huawei and talking about looking for where Corona came from. I think we're a little too reactive to it all. I think we've got the Chinese in a squirrel hole in a lot of ways, but we haven't squeezed up. It'd be interesting if we did.
Look, I've said to our people, if you've got the choice of buying something that's not Chinese, then you should buy it. Because if they're refusing to buy our product, then why should we should reciprocate.
Retribution, Bruce.
Oh, retribution's one way of putting it, yeah, I suppose. We're not given access to that market, then we'll withdraw our little bit of access here. It's a bit of old-fashioned tit for tat, but someone keep punching the nose every day, you don't give them a free lunch.
The industries hardest hit are getting on with business and moving beyond the reliance on China.
We've replaced about 80% of China.
That's good.
Yeah, look, that's come from an increase in the UK and an increase in the States. Canada's gone up a little bit, and then there's some new markets. We've re-signed and got Russia going again.
It's been a refreshing sort of like revamp of the whole system, really, and I think a lot of people are pretty proud of our ability to sort of get on with it and actually turn a negative into a positive.
I don't think the Chinese trade punishment of Australia is worthy of a great power. I think the Australian provocations, like turning the COVID inquiry bid into an anti-China statement, could have been more usefully ignored by China with a bit of a verbal response. So I think China's got a lot to learn about the diplomacy that's appropriate to a rising power.
We've just got to understand that if it's in China's interest to do something, they will do it. If it's not in their interest to do something, they won't do it. If they are going to benefit from buying from Australia, they will buy. If they're not, they won't. And that's just the reality.
When you fly, it gives you massive perspective. You can see things that you can't pick up on the ground. Only when you get up in the air can you really see the real picture.
Bigger thing that we can do is really get the Western countries to show the Chinese people in any way they can how the West has improved their living standards, especially Australia with shipments of iron ore. We've built a lot of railways, roads, buildings. We've really lifted the GDP of their people.
In today's China, any dissent will be clamped down on. Repression is the tool.
His Achilles heel are his people themselves, and he knows full well that if 1.4 billion people turned against him, that it would be very difficult for that regime to stay in power.
How does China find itself so front and centre on the international stage? A look back at its past tells us a lot about where China is now.
It goes back so far, it's as if the pharaohs are still ruling in Egypt. It's as if Europe was still being ruled by a Roman emperor.
China is the oldest living civilization on Earth. For thousands of years, warring dynasties fought for control.
In terms of revenge, cheating, conniving, we're going to screw you over, we're going to kill you, we're going to poison you. It's Shakespeare on steroids. The West certainly screwed China over during the colonial years. The US did it, France did it, the British did it, Germans did it. The Opium Wars, a lot of trade deals, all to the advancement of the Western countries.
After 2,000 years of dynastic rule, imperial order collapsed. Two opposing political ideologies emerged. The nationalists wanted to unify the fragmented nation, and the newly formed Chinese Communist Party wanted revolution.
The Communist Peasant Army is well disciplined, zealous, schooled in guerrilla tactics.
They were led by a young and radical activist.
Their leader, Mao Zedong, cleverly propounds the dynamic agrarian reform, soft pedals his ultimate goal, a communist dictatorship.
Civil war raged for the next 20 years. By 1949, the nationalist government had been driven out. Chairman Mao Zedong and the Communist Party were now in control.
Our country will never again be an insulted nation, says Mao. We have stood up.
2 million refugees fled to Taiwan.
Chiang Kai-shek lost the Chinese Civil War and he decamped to Taiwan. From 1949 onwards, the British recognised Communist China, even though the Americans didn't.
Mao was ruthless. His ambition to strengthen China's communist society knew no bounds. Tens of millions of people lost their lives, and he eventually lost his grip.
That was supposed to be the great leap forward, and I think there was 45 million deaths. It just didn't work.
In an extraordinary and desperate move, Mao Zedong turned the Communist Party on itself.
He really unleashed what they described as a red terror. He turned them against the educated, against the so-called intellectuals. People were being murdered on the street. There were public hangings, there were public confessionals. It was a really horrific time.
The world was watching, yet willing to engage.
In September 1976, death claims Mao Zedong.
In 1976, Mao Zedong's reign came to an end. For the people of China, it was a new beginning. New leader, Deng Xiaoping, returned order and reopened China to the world.
Hundreds of millions, literally hundreds of millions of people have been lifted out of poverty in China.
After 40 years of hardship under the CCP regime, the people of China demanded to be heard.
The demonstrators in Tiananmen Square were advocating basic human rights.
Since Tiananmen Square, China has made itself more authoritarian.
The modern wave of protest began. Tibetans were fighting back.
The Communist Party continued its brutal campaign against ethnic minorities and religious groups.
The handover of Hong Kong from Britain to China.
1997, Britain handed Hong Kong back to the People's Republic of China. Mass demonstrations followed. And now, President Xi Jinping is leading the Communist Party and China into a bold new direction.
The people of Hong Kong have progressively had more and more powers subtly removed.
Hong Kong people, we will not keep silence under the suppression of President Xi.
He crushed the Hong Kong democracy.
China betrayed the One Nation, Two Systems agreement. There was a deal, and that deal's been broken.
It seems pretty clear that he sees himself as a Mao-like figure, and he is absolutely determined to complete the work that he believes Mao began.
He's seeking domination not just inside his country, but he's seeking domination outside of his country.
The Chinese Communist Party is expanding its reach and its influence further than ever before. It's determined to reset the international order and become the #1 superpower. It believes it is destiny. It also believes it needs continued and secure rule over the people of China. Are you being watched
Yeah.
by members of the CCP
Yeah.
here in Australia?
Yeah. Yeah, actually, someone sent me the death threat. They said they will kill me.
9,000 kilometres from China, a young student is in fear of the CCP.
Every day,
Yeah.
you think you're being watched.
Yeah. I don't know where, I don't know who is the CDP members.
Hey.
Hey, Zhu.
Good.
How are you? You well?
Yeah.
Good. Let's go have a chat.
Yeah.
Thanks for seeing us, Zhu.
Yeah, thank you.
Is that your real name, Zhu?
Actually not.
It's not?
No.
Zhu wants to draw attention to the communist regime's obsession with control.
The Chinese people don't understand their situation. They don't understand the CCP is bad. They don't understand the CCP is brainwash them. They don't understand the one China policy is just a narrative to control them.
Zhu wants to expose the communist regime and for the people of China to wake up.
Because in China, you can't be a real person.
For speaking her mind, Zhu now fears for her life.
Doesn't it make you more of a target, though, for members of the CCP out here?
Actually, yes, but if you don't go public, maybe you will disappear secretly and no one knows about that. If I go public, everyone will know me and maybe they will not kill me directly. I hope the Australian government will protect me, but I'm not sure because too much CCP members here.
Zhu is now on a bridging visa. She's desperate to stay in Australia. Her life depends on it.
What you can see in today's China is that any dissent will be clamped down on. Repression is the tool. It is a very difficult place to lift your head and make yourself heard.
His Achilles heel, and he knows this better than anyone, are his people themselves. And he knows full well that if 1.4 billion people turned against him, that it would be very difficult for that regime to stay in power. That is why I'm absolutely convinced he crushed the Hong Kong democracy.
China has the world's largest population, made up of dozens of ethnic groups and religions. That's hundreds of millions of people with different beliefs and cultural backgrounds. But there is one principle that applies to all Chinese citizens, and it's not negotiable, and that's loyalty to the Communist Party.
Where were you born, Mastura?
I was born in East Turkestan, in the city of Khotan.
How long have you been in Australia for?
21 years, so I came in 2000.
Okay. Mastura, can I ask about your family and your relatives that are inside the camps? Can you explain who's there and how many and why?
Okay, so we lost contact with my family completely since 2018. I have 2 uncles who have been imprisoned. I have an auntie who was given a 10-year sentence, another auntie given a 7-year sentence for the reasons of giving their children a religious education. One of my aunties was given a 10-year sentence. It was simply because she stood up to somebody on the street.
Xinjiang province in far western China is home to 12 million ethnic Uyghur people. Most are Muslim and very different to the ruling Han Chinese. They've experienced systematic repression and discrimination for decades.
We've seen what's happening in Xinjiang and we've seen, a genocide taking place against Uyghur Muslims. It is because they're seen as a threat to the sovereignty of the country, a threat to the territory of the country.
Beijing decided the Uyghur culture needs to be normalised in line with the Communist Party doctrine. And just like Tibet, the CCP cracked down on the Uyghur people.
Is there any Uyghur Muslim in East Turkestan who is safe?
I don't think so, no. If you resist, obviously, there's no question you'll be, imprisoned. But just to survive, you would have to completely lose your identity.
Under President Xi, more than 380 suspected detention facilities have been built to re-educate and imprison the Uyghur people.
How do you describe what the Chinese government is doing?
It's a genocide. This is a systematic, pre-planned means of eradicating a whole people. Their language, their cultural identity, their religious identity. It's a violation of basic human rights.
It's estimated there are currently over 1 million Uyghurs imprisoned or detained in Xinjiang province. It's the largest mass detention of an ethnic group since World War II.
Joe Biden recently said that this isn't just a fight against China, it's a fight against autocracy, and our grandchildren may wonder why we didn't fight back. Words to that effect. Do you agree with him?
I feel a very strong moral burden to speak out about things like the atrocities against the Uyghur people in Xinjiang for that exact reason, because I know we will be judged by history. I know that today we judge historical figures who failed to do more in history to stand up to autocracy, and I think we will be judged too if we don't do the same.
Your family
that are in the camp, have any of them been released?
Not that we know of.
Do you think they're all alive?
We'd like to keep hope that they are alive. I guess it's really hard for all of us because you want to have hope of them being alive. And, you know, meeting them again one day, but just the thought of the things that they might be experiencing, you know, in those places, you wonder if it's, you know, if it's better that they were just not here at all.
The Chinese government has conducted direct military threat against Taiwan.
In China's mind, Taiwan has always been a part of China and should be returned to China.
Do you think they will take Taiwan by force?
They see democracies as clearly strategic opponents.
Both the United States and Australia underestimated how important the South China Sea was.
So what do they want from us?
They want us to concede.
The Chinese government should be totally ashamed.
Do you think any Chinese company that does business in Australia can keep the CCP at arm's length?
No. It's effectively about spreading the economic influence of China by connecting more markets.
Targeting poor countries.
Well, their view is that the West has been doing that forever.
It's absolutely critical we demonstrate this will not work against Australia, and we will do everything we can to stand up for ourselves.